How's it going, everybody? Just to make sure, quick check. If you can't hear us, hit that little raise hand button. Just want to make sure we're good for most people. So it looks like we are. So I appreciate you guys joining us today. I just want to start off with a quick introduction, both myself and Nika, and then a quick intro for Jeremy and Tommy before we jump right in. So my name is Jacob Rothman, co-founder and CEO of Perch, and we have Nika here, who's our head of sports science. Really appreciate you guys tuning in. I know how busy you are. There's probably a lot of stuff going on, pulling you in different directions. So it means a lot that you're spending an hour with us. So the talk is going to run about 30, 40-ish minutes, and we'll have time at the end for Q&A. So please, there's a little question, little tab for you to type in questions. Nika and I will be aggregating those during the presentation so we can then ask those towards the end. And then this talk is getting recorded, so we will be emailing this out tomorrow, so you will have a reference for it as well. And then let me jump into bios for Jeremy and Tommy. So Jeremy Jacobs is an assistant strength and conditioning coach at LSU. Before LSU, he worked at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and he also served as an airborne ranger in the United States Army, serving multiple tours in both Iraq and Afghanistan. Jeremy had a master's of science degree in pedagogy and physiological sciences from LSU. And then, of course, Tommy has been director of strength and conditioning at LSU for 20 plus years. He's a Tennessee native, spent his early part of his career looking at high school athletes, or working with high school athletes. He spent 6 years in the collegiate setting in both Tennessee and Miami before finally settling at LSU. And he has 3 national championships with LSU football. So without further ado, I will let Jeremy and Tommy take it away.
All right, thanks, Jacob. Everyone, you can hear me? We're good? All right, so I want to talk about the bits of technology that we use at LSU and how we kind of pull all that information together, and then it's really a collaborative effort on staff. I'm very blessed to be a part of a great staff that Coach Moffitt's put together. So obviously it starts with him, and then when you have guys like Vic Valoria and Jake Riedel and Connor Neighbors and Tim Johnson and Earl Chevalier and Travis Roy on staff, it makes what we do really, really easy. And we all have a part in what I'm about to present right now. It's definitely not just me. It is something that everybody on staff works on together. And then it has produced some really, really cool results, I think, in our world of strength conditioning. So I want to talk about the 3 different parts and bits of technology that we use, what I'm going to talk about today. Obviously, our velocity-based training system that we have on each rack with Perch. I'm going to talk about our force plates that we use with Vald, and our GPS units that we use with Polar. So the majority of this is going to be based around Perch and Vald and how we kind of use those 2 metrics to manipulate each other. But the GPS units definitely play a major role in what we're doing and how we program and the overall stress that we see with our athletes. So the first thing I want to show you guys is some of the Polar and the reports that we create with Polar. Now, Vic Valoria does all of our Polar reports and does an amazing job. He's also a guy who's very good with the Excel and the pivot charts. And so he's actually helped everyone on staff kind of utilize Excel better. So these are just 2 reports that Vic puts out. If you look at the report on the left, this is like the 5 major metrics that we kind of look at with this, with load, time of like practice or a game, mileage that the athletes accumulated, the speeds that we see on the field, and then yards per minute. You see there's some red bar graphs in there that is showing what we do in games versus what we do in practice. And then there's trend lines and looking how the season went. The chart on the right is more of like a macro view. So you're looking at your total mileage. That sounds like this is the receiver group based in practice and in games, some of their average speeds, their average yards per minute, their average sprints, their high excels, and then their calories burned. And we'll use that with our nutrition staff to kind of show them what are our athletes going through during a practice or a game, and how do we properly like re-nourish them. So this is the stuff that we use when it comes to our programming and how we use it. It definitely influences what we're doing, and it just gives us a better overall picture of the stress that our athletes are going through. So if we have certain things prescribed in the weight room the next day, but we look at their practice load coming in off that the previous day, we know we might need to make some adjustments based on what they did on the field. So I don't want to minimize what Polar does for us, because it does a lot of great stuff. and it definitely impacts how we program. I just don't want to spend a ton of time looking at this data. Okay, so some of the force plate stuff that we use. Okay, so we have had force plates now for about 2 years, and they jump. We use it for the counter movement jump mainly right now. So we test all of our athletes multiple times a week. The main metrics that we're looking at are RSI modified, which is your reactive strength index modified, your concentric rate of power development divided by body mass, your eccentric braking force of rate to force development divided by body mass, and then the peak power divided by body mass. So now we divide it by body mass just so that because force and load is taken into some of those metrics in physics, so that we want to make sure that our big guys don't always put out the biggest numbers. We want to see what it looks like based on the individual athlete. We use RSI mod. If you think of it as how fast you jump to your peak height, right? It's also a good gauge of CNS readiness. So we look at that a lot and how we try to influence a lot with what we do on the bar and what we do on the platform. That's a major component of something that we look at. The concentric rate of power development is a metric of how much actual force the athlete is putting into the plate on the concentric movement of the jump when they're going up. Your eccentric braking force or rate of force development is how well the athlete loads their body on the force plate, but also it's a metric of strength. So if we see our eccentric braking rate of force development going down, we know that we might need to hit a little bit more strength work on the platform. And then peak power, it's an important metric for like the sport of football, because football is a power sport. Peak power is something that we're chasing. We've all known athletes that they might be really, really strong, but they still get their butt kicked on the field. And that might just be because they can't produce the power that they need to. Their rate of force development isn't great, even though they're strong. And so we want to see, can we manipulate that with what we do on the platform? And using the force plates is something that it's a daily test and retest that we get to do with our athletes to see if what we're doing is working in a positive way. The last bullet point on there, we're just now starting to play around with other jumps on the force plate that are maybe more position specific, whether that be a squat jump, whether that be a depth drop, some single leg stuff. And what's really cool with the force plate is they jump and land on 2 different plates. And so you also get asymmetries. So you can use it for return to play protocol. You can see what is a baseline of where this athlete was at. And then let's say they had an ankle injury. And so now you can use the data on the force plate to see the athlete progressing back to 100%. And you can give that information back to the sport coach to let them know where the athlete is in the rehab process. Okay, so the force plate reports that we create. So this is done by Connor Neighbors on staff. He takes all of this information in, and then we try to make sense of it, right? So it spits it out in a big Excel data file, and then we start making charts so we can kind of see some trends over time. This is actually from our this last spring that we're doing. And it just shows you the different metrics that I was talking about: eccentric braking, RSI, your concentric rate of power development, your peak power. And we can compare it day to day, week to week, month to month to see what are our trends doing. And if you see, you see a dip and here on that February 19th, for instance, on this chart, this is an example. You can now go back and look what happened on that day or the day prior or the week prior that would maybe cause that dip. And so now you can have a kind of a cause and effect relationship with what your program is, what your practice schedule looks like. So that's where also that GPS data that we talked about earlier comes into play with all of this, because maybe you go and see a ton of yardage as a tough practice, something like that. You go back and see how that affects your force plate data. Okay, so velocity-based training, what we do in the weight room and how it affects the force plate is something that we're really, really interested in. It's something that Coach Moffitt is very, very interested in. And so he spends a lot of time when we jump our athletes. He does the majority of jumping of the athlete to make sure that, A, they're all jumping the same so that the data is reliable. And then he can go back and look and see. He's watched so many guys jump now. He knows when guys are jumping well and not just by looking at them jumping on the force plate. So that ties into how do we program as a staff to make sure that we influence those numbers on the force plate to go up, because we've noticed that as those numbers on the force plate go up, whether it's RSI mod or concentrated power development, that their speeds on the field also go up. Okay, so that's why it's important. So what is velocity-based training? So if there's a few people on here that don't know what it is, right, it's the traditional way of periodization would be you have a percent of 1 RM, and then you prescribe that percentage of 1 RM. Or now you can actually prescribe velocities on the bar, because we know, looking at this graph, what those velocities correlate to. So if I want to train power, if you go back and read all the old literature, we know that you're training within 50 to 80%. That's the percentages you're looking at training in. But now I can put a metric on it for speed to make sure that I know exactly that they're training in that parameter. If I have a new athlete and they're doing starting strength, I can start them and I know what that looks like on bar speed. If I have a really advanced athlete, I know how to push them better and how to better gauge their readiness, because the more information you accumulate with some of this stuff, you get a better picture of how your athletes are feeling and how they're performing. So something that they found through research is there is up to an 18% increase or decrease of a person's 1 rep max on a daily basis. Okay, so that's a 36% range on somebody's 1 rep max day to day, plus or minus. So if I test somebody and they, let's just say, squat 300 pounds one day, and I say that's their 1 rep max, that was their 1 rep max that day. Where the next day they come in, maybe they had a long practice, a long night, they broke up with their girlfriend, whatever it is, whatever stress they have in their body is causing them a detriment. So they couldn't squat that 300 pounds, but I'm prescribing percentages based on how they felt that one day. Velocity-based training takes all of that out of the equation. Well, when they come in, I can say we're training at 0.85 meters per second, and whether they feel good or bad that day, I can still train that parameter for everybody on the team, and it truly makes our program individual for every athlete that walks on that platform. So some athletes that are feeling great, we're going to move heavier loads than we normally would have prescribed. Athletes that aren't feeling great are moving lighter loads, but we're all moving it at the same speed. We're all training the same parameter, and you just look at that chart, and that chart kind of helps paint that picture of what we want to do based on where we're at in the season. Something that, now, velocity-based training is not new. Coach Moffitt has been doing it at LSU since he's gotten here. So what's helped, though, is technology has progressed to help us use it better. So we used to use tendos, and tendos were great, except the data would be erased the minute the next rep happened. So if you weren't hand jamming and writing down all of those numbers and velocities, then you would lose them and you'd have no access to them again. So that was a drawback of, unless you hand wrote all of the information down, you had no way to go back and track and look at your program, right? So that is why velocity-based training is where it's at today, in technology is helping us utilize it better, because the whole goal of it is how do we influence this force velocity curve, right? So the parameters that we had on the last page for what we're training and what percentages we need to be at to train those certain parameters and what speeds correlate to those. The whole goal of it is to get this curve, the force velocity curve, and shift it to the right. And so now we know, because with whether we're training max strength at the top or max speed at the bottom or somewhere in between, we know what velocities and what percentages correlate to that, to give the athlete a more well-rounded program to make sure we're shifting the curve to the right. And when you have a sport like football, you want to see your athletes get more powerful as they're spending a longer time in your program. So one way that's helping us do that, right, is now Perch has helped us kind of bring velocity-based training into the 21st century. So I have this picture. This is just a picture of our weight room, our racks. And I want to show this because I want you to see how seamless the integration was of Perch into our weight room was. So all it is a camera and a tablet. You don't see a bunch of wires. You don't see strings. The bar doesn't have to get moved around. The device doesn't have to get moved around to be put on the bench bar or the squat bar, because we bench inside the rack and we squat and clean and all that stuff outside the rack. The camera moves on itself. When I select an exercise, it shifts and moves to what we do. And so now I'm not wasting time in between. I get to spend more time with my athletes and coaching them rather than making sure they're set up to do the exercise correctly. It was the cool thing about it is when we got this, we were able to utilize it immediately. It wasn't something that we had to slowly integrate into because we weren't doing anything different than we were doing before. We were just doing it better. It allowed us to quantify and calculate what our guys were doing on a regular basis every single time they get in the weight room instead of really having to plan for it by putting out tendo units and stuff like that. Another huge benefit is it's a cloud-based system. So now all of that information gets sent up to the cloud and I can sit down and pull it at my computer. We could be in the middle of the workout, Coach Moffitt can go to his computer and pull up anybody that's currently worked out that day and look at what they did on the platform, and all that information is saved in there forever. So I can go back weeks, months, years later and see what that athlete did and track it over time. And now it really helps us make decisions in the program going forward week to week because we can access everything that we've done in the past. Okay, so this is some of the cool information that we're getting now from Perch, right? This is stuff that we would not have been able to do before if it wasn't a cloud-based system. So if you look at this is some like of the force velocity profiling stuff. If you look at the two top graphs, right, the velocity by percentage, you see there's an R squared value on those charts, right? The closer to 1 would be like a perfect trend line on that line. The farther away you get from it, right, the more sporadic you get as far as numbers. So what's cool about this, these are two different athletes. It's the same exercise, it's back squat, and it's two different athletes. So the athlete on the left, the R squared value being at 0.8, right? You want it, like the trend line is actually would be a perfect 1. So at 0.82, that's a really high R squared value, meaning that all of those data points are really pretty close to that line. The other chart to the right, where the R squared value is 0.46, you're looking at a younger athlete on our team. And so they're a little more sporadic as far as how consistent they are in what they do training. And so it's a cool thing for us to see that as they spend more time in our program and become more of a proficient lifter, that this R squared value goes up. It's also, we can start to use this now for 1 rep max predictors. So we know, all right, they're predicting as we get closer to 100% where their speed should be on the bar. And so when we see those numbers come across Perch and we see those velocities on the bar, we know we're getting really, really close to their 1 rep max, let's say, if we're testing them that day. It gives us kind of thresholds to train at as well. Like we're not going to go any slower than this and we're not going to go any faster than this, depending on the day of what we want to train. And the graph on the bottom, if you notice it's starting to look like the force velocity curve that I talked about earlier. So you can actually move the mouse on some of these data points, and you can start to get some actual true force velocity profiling with some of this stuff to figure out if I want to train at a certain percentage or I want to train at a certain speed, what percentage should I be looking at ballpark wise. So it helps guide our programming on week to week of how we're going to program. And then we also look back at our force plate data to make sure that as our numbers are improving, what did we do in the weight room? And if we don't like what we see, then we make adjustments. And if we do like what we see, then we know we're on the right path and we're going to continue down that road. So every week during the in-season, before Coach Moffitt made any changes to the program, he would go back and look at this stuff, look at the charts as far as what we wanted to train parameter-wise with velocities, and make sure that we were in those parameters. So if we wanted to train strength, then we knew we needed to be below 0.5 meters per second. And that was something where it really dialed in what we were doing in the in-season program. Okay, so this is a chart. This would be like a daily report chart that I would make. And if you look at some of these metrics, you see, right, these are 2 exercises we did that day and we used with Perch. The 2 metrics on here that you see are the mean velocity for those 2 movements of the back squat and the sumo deadlift. And then you see peak power, right? We are chasing peak power. If you look at the purple graph, there's no numbers on there, but that would be what the percent of 1RM on the bar. So we knew that we needed to stay within a certain percentage because we wanted our peak power to stay high. And if we put too much weight on the bar, you would assume that power would keep going up, but there is definitely a threshold where you start seeing diminishes in peak power. So we made sure that we stayed within those numbers and trained that throughout the in-season. And then this would be more of like a macro view. This is like the entire season, looking at two movements. This would be a Thursday for us in our in-season program. And I want you to see how the technology is really working together on some of this stuff. So you obviously see this is mean velocity on both of these exercises. And the reason we still look at some of our mean velocity with power clean is there's so many variances with height and all that kind of stuff that it just gives us a better consistent picture of where we're at, still looking at mean velocity with that. But based on the week of the team we were playing, that's what the different colors look like on this graph. We knew what metric we wanted to train and what parameter we wanted to be, so we had those velocities programmed. And then if you look at the bottom, I have RSI and the concentric rate of power development. And over the course of the entire season, you see it's a positive trend line. So that what we did in season, these guys were continuing to make improvements on their RSI modified on the force plate and continuing to make improvements on the concentric rate of power development throughout the entire season. So the biggest takeaway is after all of this, our guys were running their fastest speeds at the end of the season. And leading up to the national championship game, we saw some of our fastest speeds on the field. So we knew what we were doing in the weight room was having a positive effect in keeping these guys healthy and keeping them dynamic throughout an entire 15-game season. Okay, so some of the data you can pull for purchases, I think this is pretty cool because this is stuff that you couldn't do before because you just didn't have the collection of data that you have now. So this is, so we have Coach Tim Johnson, who has put together those force velocity charts and the R squared value charts. He also has a chart that puts together basically the number of reps that we've done at each percentage and the average number of reps that we've completed at each percentage. So we squatted pretty light in season. But then going back and looking at the numbers, you see it gave a great blueprint of what we did all season. So from our in-season program last fall, you see we spent the majority of time for the back squat, we spent in the 55 to 65% because like I said, we were chasing peak power. So we did over 10,000 reps as a team in that percentage range. But if you look, we also did a ton of reps above 90%. I mean, we have 142 reps done at 100% of back squat. Now, a lot of that was done by our younger guys, which means that we had our developmental squad on our team getting stronger throughout the entire in-season. But we touched some good weight in-season as well. Where looking back, if we didn't have this, we probably wouldn't have pulled those numbers and realized how much work we actually did. Deadlift, we were working in that 80 to 90% range. We're using that more for strength. So we did almost 10,000 reps at that range. But if you look, we still have people that pulled between 95 and 105%. So because we were using velocity, we were able to take advantage of days when guys felt really, really good. So I had guys that I couldn't put enough weight on the bar. We had a certain percentage prescribed for that day to, we wanted to work strength, for instance. So we wanted to be at 0.5 meters per second or just below that. And it didn't matter how much weight was on the bar. Guys were ripping it off the ground. So we had guys hit PRs in season when normally we wouldn't program that way. We wouldn't have them program that heavy. But because of how they felt and because we had velocity to dictate that to us, we were able to take advantage of those good days. Cleans, same thing. We did 10,000 reps between 70 and 80%, but we still worked up to, we had 250 cleans done at 100%. And the same thing with bench. So our guys trained heavy. They trained dynamic as well. And the perch really helped us guide what we were doing. And then we saw that positive influence on the force plate data as well. So that was kind of how all those technologies tied in together. That picture at the bottom of the screen is just kind of what your perch interface looks like. So you can pull up an athlete and go back to any day and see what they did that day. And it's a way that you can really track your program throughout a long time to help guide your decisions. And I think sometimes with velocity-based training, Coach Moffitt was talking about this earlier, is we talk so much about how we want to move the bar as fast as you can, and that's true, but it also helps guide slow reps. So we don't always, if we want to make sure guys are training true strength, we can make sure that the bar's not moving that fast and that there's a proper load on the bar to get them in those zones. So it really lets you not only train dynamically to move lighter loads faster, but it also helps you train your max strength and to learn to use, to make sure that you're training at a heavy enough percentage to actually make those gains that you need to. And the last slide that I have before we start getting some questions is, how are we going to use this technology now getting back in the weight room once this whole COVID-19 thing is hopefully over? So the biggest concern we're all going to have going back is, where are our athletes at? Did they have access to any equipment during this time? And what are their numbers now? So maybe we had their number and we knew that it was, this is their old 100%, or this is their old 80%, but maybe that's 100% for them now based on time that they haven't had under the bar. So now we having this chart, okay, it will help guide us in those decisions to know, hey, look, we need to train strength, or we're going to train hypertrophy, and so we need to train within this speed. So we can use it now to dictate how we're going to progress our guys back to getting ready to play. And it's a great starting point. So when we program something that we think they're at, we can go back and then look at the velocities they trained at and see, does it match up to what we think they're doing? So it kind of takes that guesswork out, where maybe we thought we were training power, but we're training actual max strength because they just couldn't move it that fast. Well, then we know where they're at, or maybe they're in a better shape than we thought. So this perch is going to be really key for us when we get back, to just kind of see what's the starting point of where we're going, and then it will help us guide our decisions going forward into this next season. So that is all the slides I have. If anybody has questions, or Nika or Jacob, and feel free to ask from Coach Moffitt or me.
So, all right. So, first of all, I'd like to thank Jeremy. He did a great job. But there's a couple of things that I want to talk about before we go to all the questions, because I know there's going to be a bunch. The first thing is that we found this out early on, that you can't break software. And our players picked up on the interface really quick, and it really happened. We were actually kind of worried how long it would take us to do it, but the players picked up on it in a matter of seconds, not days. I mean, they were phenomenal with it. And then I would see something going on, and I'd go over there and fix. I would go to touch the screen, and the players would knock my hand out of the way and say, "Coach, I got this." So it worked really well. It was easy to integrate into our program. And then as far as the coaching thing, the thing that helped us a lot is we would play around with the data. We would, I'd come up with a question and ask the guys what they thought about a certain metric that we call on it. And then they would dive into the Excel, and some of the stuff was really surprising. And then some of it was nothing. We were going down a rabbit hole that we needed to back out of. We also saw some undulations in our data. And there would be times I would be looking at the data after a workout, and for a split second, I would panic. And then I would say, let's let this ride out for a couple of days. And Jeremy showed a slide earlier from when we started spring ball. We had a dip in our force plate jumps. And those are kind of the things that you want to let ride out a little bit. In season, you want to have a quicker hand on the programming. But during the off season, when you're training for strength and you come out of your off season running program and you suddenly start practice where it's not as gradual as what the in season would be, that could cause some calls from alarm. But again, we just let that ride out. One of the most one of the most obvious things that we found, and everybody knows this, that volume fatigues you. And whether it was volume in the weight room or volume outside on the practice field or in our off-season running program, that was one thing that that always stands out, that you have to manage the volume of your work, whether you're lifting weights or running or practicing. That was one thing that we really had to look at. But the best thing that velocity-based training allows you to do is dial in your quality efforts. And that's the thing that I want everyone to understand, that you just don't spend time doing things that aren't going to have a positive influence on the team. If you want to train for strength, you move the bar slow. And we tell our players that here's the threshold that you want to train within, and you have to make adjustments from set to set. So if the bar's moving too fast, we slow it down by adding weight. And if you're training for power, speed, strength, whatever you want to call it, if the bar is moving too slow, then you just take weights off. And so we gave them parameters that we wanted them to lift in, and that ensures, again, that you're getting quality efforts. Now, I looked at some of the questions, and they, people really want to know, what it does for us. One of the things about having the software is it ensures that you have compliance, not necessarily about if this guy's doing every set or every rep, but you can also look to make sure that you're hitting all of the percentages that you're supposed to be hitting. And it's compliance by the strength and conditioning staff, not necessarily the athletes. Although you do get a rep count for every set that every player gets. Our people here are really good, but it also ensures that I'm hitting the velocities that I need to make sure we're hitting to train strength or speed, strength, etc. And so it gives me compliance to make sure that we're going to get strong during a period of time where we're supposed to get strong. And so those were a couple of things that I wanted to hit on first and make sure that everybody knew that. And now Nika and Jacob, y'all can come back on, and we'll answer any questions that people have.
Awesome.
There they go.
That was a great presentation. Yeah, we're back.
Thanks.
So there are a bunch of questions, both questions that came in live as well as questions that were asked previously via the registration link. So we'll start with a couple, but anybody who's listening in, keep asking the questions as they come in. We'll do our best to get to all of them. I think one common question that we personally heard a lot, and you guys might be able to help out with, maybe it's not totally applicable to you guys, but is like, how do you guys be efficient with the data that you collect and kind of sift through the data when maybe you don't have a large coaching staff? I know, Jeremy, you specifically deal with a lot of the BBT data. So I don't know if there's a way that you guys can, like, tricks, tips, how do you be efficient with analyzing the data?
Well, the first thing, you have to zero in on what you want to see. Again, you don't want to go down rabbit holes that aren't going to influence the program, your programming positively. Some of that stuff can wait till the off season or on a weekend when you have nothing to do. So you have to streamline what you're looking for, and then delegate that. If you have a staff of 3 people, and those 3 people should handle 3 different things instead of overworking one staff member. For instance, on our staff, again, Vic does the polar, Jeremy and Tim do perch, and Connor does the force plate data. And then because there's other guys that are in charge of, making sure that, there's compliance within academics. There's people who are in charge of all these, have all these other responsibilities. So we delegate these type of tasks among all the staff members. So somebody asked me the other day who our sports scientist was, and I said, you're talking to him. But really, we have 9 sports scientists on our staff, and everyone has a particular role that they're going to be involved in. And for instance, Jeremy spends probably, how much time, Jeremy? 45 minutes, maybe at the end of the day, crunching the numbers.
Yep. Yeah, 40 minutes to an hour. And it's gotten better as the players, as we got better using it, my time cut down even more. So as we got more efficient with the system, it's even less.
Awesome. Another question we get is like, and this one was asked previously, but like, is technology going to be something that all strength coaches have to be experts in? I guess this is a question just along the general trend of strength and conditioning and what you guys are seeing in terms of, being proficient in your field and helping your athletes.
Well, great question. Here at LSU, we have the means, to pretty much do whatever we want to do. Seldom do they ever say, no, you can't do that. And I'm talking about the financial means. So whether or not you choose to do it or not, to some degree is going to be based on finances. But then, since I was a young coach, I've always been intrigued by certain data points. And although I didn't always have the means at home, or my Excel prowess isn't as good as some of the other people, but years ago, we relied on experience and intuition in our programming. And what sports science does is help you to streamline your thought processes and make sure that you're making decisions based on fact and not experience and intuition. Now, experience and intuition still plays a huge role in what we all do. But I think the sports science helps focus our energies and our efforts, and again, make sure that the efforts that we do are quality efforts, and we're not wasting time doing things that aren't going to influence the product that we put on the field.
Absolutely. Another question we just had that came in. Are you guys doing any position specific parameters during lift sessions throughout your microcycles? For example, skill guys for speed, big seal stays in the strength range. So like your bigger guys, I guess how specific are you getting with like sports specificity when it comes to like VBC or just for training in general?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And I mentioned this in the blog that I did with you guys. To some degree, everything that we do is general in nature. The most specific thing that you can do in the sport of football is play the game itself and go out and push people around. In the game of football, every play ends in a pushing match. 1, 2, 5, 7, 8 guys pushing against one another. And so the most specific thing that you can do in developing a team for the sport of football, which is our sport, is go out and do that. Secondly, it would be to develop the muscles, the movement patterns that would help you to do that. And I think the most sport-specific exercise that we do on our team is squat. I don't think there's another exercise more specific, irregardless of the position that you play in. You have to be able to squat. So that would be the general answer. To try to answer that question more specifically, our programs are based on each player's strengths, weaknesses, and injury status. So if a guy is lacking eccentric strength, we're going to make sure that he does extra eccentric strength. If a guy has an asymmetry between his right and left leg, we're going to focus on doing things to correct that asymmetry. If guys are lacking explosive strength, we're going to do things to do that. And if a guy can't squat because of a knee injury, and I'm sure every listener here today signs a couple of freshmen that can't squat. And we sign guys that have never touched a barbell. And so we're going to spend if a guy can't squat, the first thing we're going to do, and if it takes a year to get him to be able to squat, we're going to teach him to squat and squat well before we worry about anything else. And so we do have some things that we do, whether they be position specific, isometrics and exercises. Yes, we do. But first and foremost, we're going to concentrate on that athlete's individual strengths, weaknesses, and injuries first.
Awesome. No, great response. Another question we have is maybe as people are thinking about implementing technology with like within their program and with their staff members, like how do you guys teach your staff members that don't have experience with technology to incorporate it within your programming? So I guess what was your specific process with force plates, VBT, like polar, or do you just have any tips in general?
Yeah, so I think this is the answer he's looking for. So with the force plates, we got it out and we started jumping on it. We created profiles for ourselves and we competed on the staff, and everybody knows that I am the most explosive athlete on our staff. And I was able to substantiate that by how great my jumps are. So we get on the force plate and we jump. And then we looked at the data. And then we actually had somebody from our video department come down and he videoed every person from the front and from the side jumping. And we went back and looked at that. And, you know, and like Jeremy said, I've seen every person on our team jump thousands of times. I think we're probably close to 50,000 jumps on the force plate. And so I've probably, of those 50,000 jumps, I've probably seen 40,000 of them myself, because I try to do all the force plate jumps, because that's where our data analysis begins. And if it's not done right, then the information is not going to be valid. And everything that we do has to be repeatable. There go my notes. So we have to make sure that everyone on the staff, so everyone on our staff can do every aspect of this. So everyone, again, we share in every responsibility. So everyone on the staff knows everything that they have to know about the Polar and how everything is done in Polar. So after practice every day, there's not one guy that's sitting there making sure that all the bugs are synced and that the straps are washed. Same thing with perch. Now Jeremy is our perch man, and if anything goes wrong during the day, if we drop Wi-Fi for a second, then we try to handle it based on the best piece of knowledge that we have. If we can't do it, then Jeremy comes over and shows us how to do it. But we walk every staff member through every task that we have to do. When we see mistakes on the reports, I don't know what kind of reporting mistake that we would get, but if we see something, then I'll call a staff meeting and we go over it immediately and we make corrections to whatever that mistake is. And I'm generally the one who makes all the mistakes, and they'll say, coach, that's not right, you messed that up. But we do it as a team. Everything that we do is done as a team, and everyone knows how to work everything.
Yeah, that's great. Everybody gets a little bit of experience doing everything. Another good question is if you guys can provide objective or maybe some anecdotal examples as well of how some of the weight room data, so force plate, BBT data, has translated to like improvements in game performance health, or if there were any leading indicators of some of this data about, you know, potential injuries on the field or anything like that, that you then noticed happening on the field.
Yeah, so we'll go over the injury thing first. So yes, we've looked at, we've seen things, certain asymmetries and people who have no eccentric strength, and you know, they can't put the brakes on. So we've seen a lot of stuff with the force plate, and some of it we have been able to influence. And then unfortunately for some people, they got hurt before we were able to make corrections in it, because some of these things, if you have an athlete that's 21 years old, and you know, you didn't find these things until you started jumping them when they were 21 years old. You don't have enough time to change, the course of Mother Nature and everything else. In many instances, I would like to think that we have. But so here's a neat thing. So you put someone on the force plate, you jump up and down on the force plate, you jump a kid, let's say kids jump 300 times, and you notice that there is a definite asymmetry on his jump profiles. And then you put him on the perch and you start doing a back foot elevated single leg squat, or a front foot elevated single leg squat. And you look at their velocities and their peak power and their mean velocities, and that asymmetry doesn't show up. So that's just the way the guy jumps. We found that when somebody jumps off their right leg, they will land on their left leg. But then when you put them on the perch and you isolate their right and left legs, sometimes those asymmetries don't show up. Sometimes they do. And that's the neat thing about having both technologies. Right. And then it's also very good for return to play. If you have a player, whether we have found reductions in RSI mod when people get a concussion. And then we've also seen when people say that they don't have, or they have a concussion, you look on the film, you say, how did that guy get a concussion based on that? And then they jump on the force platform or force plate, and then you don't see a reduction in RSI mod. Now, we don't question anyone. That person is not going to practice regardless until he says, okay, I'm not having symptoms anymore. So it's interesting for return to play and actually substantiating claims of injuries, et cetera. So you can find a lot in this type of technology. Now, as far as tangible data of improving performance, absolutely. Absolutely. And this goes back to years ago at the very beginning. We've had players, we've had coaches that say this person will never play here because he can't generate power. And then you take that particular player, and every day that he trains, he's training, he's practicing velocity-based training. And what it does for you is it teaches you how to synchronize and how to be explosive in the weight room. I mean, it teaches you to coordinate and synchronize your neuromuscular system and all, your lower body and your upper body. It ties it all in. And we've had guys that coaches have said these guys will never ever play here because they can't generate power. And then those guys have come on or gone on to be All-Americans. And so, yes, there are tangible, and that goes back years and years and years. I don't even have time to go over that, but yes, there is, yes, absolutely.
Awesome.
Coach Moffitt, to follow up to that really quickly, are you coordinating with the sports medicine department for all of this as well? Is this something that, are you collaborating and kind of all those sports?
Yes, great question. So our head athletic trainer and I have worked together for 20 years. We've been colleagues here at LSU for over 20 years. So there's great communication between our two departments, and Mickey Collins is our actual training room liaison. And we visit with her 3 or 4 times a day in season or more. She comes by. The training room and the weight room are just a few 30 feet apart. So yes, we collaborate many times throughout the day on all of this data. And they'll come, if I'm jumping someone, I'll text Mickey or Gabby or Derek or Josh, whoever's doing their rehab or whoever's handling that injury. I'll text them real quick and say, hey, come here, show you something. And there has been times when they have brought us players and say, jump them, so we can watch their jumps. So yes, all of this data is shared between strength and conditioning and sports med multiple times throughout the day.
Awesome.
And to kind of,
and I know,
sorry, Nick, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I know Coach Moffitt, you and I covered this when we talked on the phone like 2 weeks ago, but I think so we're curious to kind of how steering velocity of the bar kind of changes how you're preparing for certain opponents kind of coming up in line. So I think we talked about this with regards to your SEC title and national championship as well.
Right. So, yeah, you want to try again to do things that allow you to put the very best product that you can on the field. And so through a collaborative effort of all of our staff members, we sit down and meet. We'll meet 3 times a day on this. And I'll ask them, so in the morning, on Monday morning, we'll meet briefly before the workout and as a staff, and and make sure that everybody understands what the goal is for today. And then the first group comes in, and generally it's a pretty good sized group. After that, we would meet again, and I would say, okay, what did you guys see? To make sure that what our goal is and what is actually going on in practice, when I mean practice in the weight training section, match up. And if our goal is stronger, then I have to make sure that the velocities that we're hitting that workout, that training session, match up with what our goal is for that particular day or week. We can also look at the data to determine if we have a big opponent coming up, and we have noticed a slight trend in the data that some of the things may be dropping, then we are going to begin to target that immediately. And so I've been asked, how does the football coach respond to this type of stuff? He loves it, okay? But I don't go to if I see something that's diminishing, if I see one of the values that we're tracking or variables that we're tracking diminishing, I look at myself to make those corrections first, because our players are here to play football. And so not lift weights, So I look to make those adjustments in my program first before I go to the coaches and say, Coach, we have to practice less this week because of. And so, yes, we do take a lot of the data into consideration based on who the opponent is that week, or if we have a series of opponents that statistically and tactically I think we can play better than they are, then we're going to plow right through a 3-week phase of maximum strength development and then download for a particular opponent and then begin focusing on some speed strength and prior to that contest. So yes, absolutely.
Kind of similar vein, like common question we get too is, how are you guys aggregating this data? Are you looking at it in a silo, or are you using kind of your polar data or your force plate data to inform like what you're doing in the weight room, like the velocity metrics that you're looking at? Like I know Jeremy's told me an anecdote in the past where you had a specific group and you saw their velocities all a little bit lower for a given day, and then therefore you kind of changed weights or the programming a little bit for the rest of the groups. Like, how are you using all of your technology to make real-time decisions in the weight room?
Well, so the best thing about velocity-based training and technology, whether it be Tendo or Perch or whoever, and Brian Mann has talked a lot about this, is auto-regulation. So the changes are made first and foremost by the student athlete while he's performing that rep. So if he has the parameters that he is to work in, let's say we're doing cleans and I want the parameters to be between 1 point, and they're heavy cleans. Let's say I want the parameters to be between 1.0 and 1.1 meters per second. That's a very small window. Then that athlete has to adjust the weight. Well, he has to adjust his technique first, and then he has to adjust his effort to make sure that we're getting the quality effort, and then the weight has to be regulated as well. So that is the purest form of how it's taken care of there. And then, yes, so we have polar, force plate, and perch that we look at, and they're looked at by 3 people. And then I take those three sources, and then I sit down, and first I look at it as a whole. What are we doing here, here, and here that could possibly be affecting it? And then I go try to eliminate things. Well, no, we've been doing this, like practice. Monday is always going to be Monday. Tuesday is always going to be Tuesday. And so practice, there's probably less variance in practice because of our practice plan than there is anything. And then if I make an adjustment to the lifting program and I don't see a change, then that might be something where I would go to the position coach and say, hey, Justin Jefferson, we need to really dial back what he does today in practice. And then the next time Justin comes in, his numbers go through the roof. So it just depends.
Awesome. So I think we got time for 1 or 2 more questions. So another one we get is like, what specific, you're basically, with this technology, you guys are testing almost every day, right? You're jumping several times a week.
Yeah.
But then every time you're in practice, you're basically testing with your polar. Every time you're lifting, you're getting data. It's like, you're basically testing them. Are you guys still testing, like, you're still doing 1RM, still doing vertical jump tests? Like, how has that changed, or what are you still doing?
Yeah, so it's really hard now to do a vertical jump, because when you look at the force plate data and then you look at the vertical jump, then you realize that the vertical jump may be the best shoulder mobility test there are. So we haven't really vertical jumped since we started the force plate. But that's probably because the scouts still ask, what's his vertical jump? So yes, we do need the vertical jump. 1RMs, absolutely, because I think our guys, that's competition and they get fired up for it. But again, we're testing every day. Jeremy's got wide receivers. Jeremy will come to me and say, Coach, it doesn't matter what I put on the bar, he's blowing through it. And then Jake Riedel, who trains our defensive line, would say, I'd say, Jake, how we're squatting 82.5%. Jake, how's your guys squatting today? And he says, Coach, they're blowing through the numbers. And that's why this technology gives us a lot of confidence in what we do, because we can go back and look at the percentages that we have programmed, and then you look at the velocities that you're hitting, and then you say, holy mackerel, man, I'm holding these guys back, let them go. And they're smashing it. They smash the numbers. And then you look, the next time they come in the gym, you look at their force plate numbers and they're through the roof. And so that lifting, because it has a potentiation effect on the jumps, and it also has a potentiation effect on the practice, which then carries over to the game. So it's all interrelated. So we test really every time they come in the weight room, if that guy is capable of hitting those numbers within the parameters, let him go.
And I guess one last question for you guys. I know a lot of coaches are thinking about this. Jeremy definitely covered it. It's like in the slide that we're looking at right now. But I guess, could you talk a little bit more specifics about how you guys are bringing your players back after such a long time away? I think we've talked, you guys have done a great job of making sure your athletes are being active, but you get them back in the weight room, maybe they haven't been doing heavy lifts when they're gone. Like, how do you ensure that you get them back to the baseline? Yeah.
Well, so when we start programming, so for instance, we're definitely not going to go straight to 85 and 100%. We'll start with hypertrophy and accelerated strength on squats. We'll start in that range right there. And if those numbers are coming back fast, if they're coming back 0.85, like if we're squatting and those guys come back and the numbers are 0.85 or higher, I know that guy had been doing what he was supposed to do. If we're squatting in the 70 to 80% range, and those numbers are coming back in the 40s, 0.4, 0.45, then I know that guy hasn't been squatting. And same for snatch and cleans. If we're snatching and cleaning and the mean velocity comes back in the 0.3s and 0.4s, I know that that guy's either been doing plyos, he's been sprinting, or he's been doing snatches and cleans. If those numbers are coming back and, you know, high 90s and, you know, 1.0, then I know that he hasn't been doing his plyos, he hasn't been sprinting, and he probably hasn't been lifting either. So, you know, we'll come back, you know, whenever we do, it's going to be the first couple of weeks going to be light and let us gauge all of this. And probably what we're going to do is to have two groups. We'll have the group that had access to barbells and stuff, and then you'll have another group, remedial group, that did not. And we have guys, I know we have guys that have nothing. And there's going to be a great divide in how we go about doing it. All right, now, before we leave, I would like to give everyone my email address, and it is jmoffi1@lsu.edu. So jmoffi1@lsu.edu. And I'm going to put it, I was going to put it on the chat here. I don't know. And Jeremy, if you'll give them your email address again, you know, please feel free to share it. Email me anytime, and I'll try to be more specific in these answers.
Yeah, my email is just jjaco52@lsu.edu. So same thing. Any questions that come up from this at all, I'm happy to answer them.
Yeah, and if for whatever reason you didn't get their email, I think you guys all have mine, because I think it came from my email. I'll be happy to share their emails with you as well if you didn't get it. Just feel free to reach out. But Tommy, Jeremy, really appreciate you guys taking the time. I know how busy you are, so it means a lot. And again, everybody listening, it also means a lot that you guys tuned in. I hope you got something out of it. So yeah, if you guys have any questions, these guys, please direct them to them. But we really appreciate the time. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.